Have you ever noticed that the more clear-headed people are, the more easily they feel exhausted? They do not act impulsively, do not lose control, rarely compete aggressively, and seldom rely on others. They are accustomed to thinking independently, skilled at weighing gains and losses, and always cautious and rational when facing choices. In crowds, they avoid making noise. In relationships, they demand little, as if they are naturally endowed with a calm demeanor. In the eyes of others, they are reliable, mature, and possess a sense of propriety. But if you look closely, you will notice an unmistakable weariness in their eyes. It is not the drowsiness from staying up late, but a persistent psychological drain. Their clarity does not stem from having seen through the world, but from once trying too hard to fit into it. They habitually anticipate emotions, prepare in advance, and even forgive impending disappointments ahead of time. What appears as yielding is actually their earlier recognition of the cost of persistence. You may know such people, or perhaps you are one of them. At work, they always shoulder responsibilities without complaint, even when exhausted, because others have it tough too. In front of family, they never voice their stress, because even if I say it, I won't be truly understood. In interpersonal relationships, they always consider others' feelings, and even when wronged, they say it's okay. They possess the ability to put everyone at ease, yet they alone cannot let themselves relax. You always respond before others speak, apologize before they frown, and exit conversations before the atmosphere turns awkward. Over time, you become quieter, more independent, and just adequate. You do not lack the need for love. You simply learn too early not to wait for it. You do care about yourself, but you know all too well the risks of expressing it. The world calls you mature, steady, calm, and reliable, as if you have no emotions. But you know that is only because you hide your feelings too deeply and suppress them too tightly, inadvertently making others think you are truly unmoved. You never considered these traits honorable. You simply saw them as the way you had to survive. You maintain a presence in crowds that is just right, neither too much nor too little, enough to avoid seeming abrupt or being overlooked. You are always the first to sense shifts in the atmosphere, whether in a work meeting or a gathering of friends. You know when to speak, when to step back, and when to pretend everything is fine. While others are still complaining, you are already cleaning up the mess for them. When silence falls in a conversation, you instinctively fill it with a remark to ease the tension. When others need a listener, you are never absent. Yet when you want to be heard, you swallow the words before they leave your mouth. You are so used to playing the role of the understanding one in relationships that when someone genuinely wants to understand you, you no longer know how to open up. You say no problem when someone steps on your foot in an elevator, smile and say thank you when a server brings the wrong dish, and find excuses to forgive friends who overlook you. You can always rationalize others' behavior, but rarely defend your own. In intimate relationships, you choose to yield because you fear the distance that arguments bring. You suppress your emotions because you know your dissatisfaction might make the other person uncomfortable. You proactively solve problems for them, but seldom let anyone know your own difficulties. You package consideration as natural, self-sacrifice as maturity, but you know it is not. You simply learned to trade a good temper for fewer conflicts. You once thought this was just your personality, but you increasingly realize these behaviors are the result of long-term pretense. You mask disappointment with smiles, respond to grievances with silence, and evade true desires with whatever works. You seem emotionless, but in every moment you keep silent, you are secretly managing emotions on the verge of collapse. You rarely explode, but you know you are not without feelings. You are just unsure if anyone will stay to comfort you after an outburst. So you continue to suppress, stay calm, and be the person who makes others comfortable. Sometimes, though, you suddenly cry in the shower, or feel a tightness in your chest at midnight. You are unsure if this counts as fragility. You are just a bit tired. It is not that you do not want to express yourself, but that no one has truly asked in a long time, "Are you okay?" You begin to wonder if you were born this way, but upon closer reflection, you realize it was not accidental. Your sensitivity to others' emotions comes from learning too early that safety derives from control, and control from anticipation. You avoid losing control because you know no one will clean up the mess if you do. You avoid dependence because you understand it means vulnerability, which can be exploited, dismissed, or ignored. You strive to do everything correctly because mistakes once cost you dearly. Thus, you develop a complex psychological structure, outwardly calm, inwardly vigilant. You appear agreeable on the surface, but your mind constantly calculates potential risks. You apologize in advance, concede early, and remedy preemptively, because you do not believe the world will be gentle with you. You struggle to relax because relaxation means losing control. In psychology, this is known as a hypervigilant response, a survival strategy formed from living long-term in uncertain or unseen environments. Your rationality is not innate, but a trained defense mechanism. You use understanding others to protect yourself from misunderstanding and maintaining order to ward off fear of chaos. You think you are helping others, but you are only ensuring you will not be excluded. This is not indifference or self-suppression, but an extremely clever way to survive. Your brain learns to react ahead of time, your body learns not to express, and your emotions learn to withdraw automatically. Over time, your heart becomes a quiet bomb, shelter-safe yet empty. When others call you mature, rational, or steady, they do not see that your maturity grew from countless grievances, denials, and being overlooked. You did not naturally know how to soothe others. You simply became too familiar with disappointment and learned to soothe yourself in advance. You are not emotionless. You just learned long ago that emotions do not change outcomes. So you smile through everything, as if you have seen through the world, when in fact you are simply terrified of experiencing collapse again. Defense is never a flaw. It was once your only way to survive. You may no longer remember the day you started becoming this way. Only a vague scene emerges at night, the moment you first realized expressing emotions was dangerous. Perhaps it was in class when a teacher misunderstood you, and as you tried to explain, you were cut off with "stop making excuses." Perhaps at home, when you gathered courage to tell your parents you were upset, only to hear "don't be dramatic." Perhaps among friends, when you shared a bit of vulnerability and saw impatience in their eyes. In that instant, your body registered a signal silence is safer than argument. Being sensible is more acceptable than honesty. So you learned to retract words, hide emotions, and suppress reactions. You began cautiously observing others' expressions in every conversation, fearing one wrong word would ruin the mood. You started calculating investment and risk in every relationship, as if intimacy were a game that could spiral out of control at any moment. While others expressed freely, you had already mastered reading the room. You noticed their tone, pace, and the impatience in their breathing. Your caution became instinct. The most heartbreaking part is that these skills were not deliberately learned, but forced upon you by life. Once, you went to school sick because you knew taking a day off would be seen as dramatic. Once, you bombed a test but did not cry because you knew no one would comfort you. Once you wanted to lash out, but held back because you knew it would only bring greater indifference. From then on, you stopped easily saying it hurts or I want. You hid every emotional fluctuation behind a smile, telling yourself it's okay, I can handle it. Over time, this I can became your armor and your cage. What others cannot see are the hollow moments when you wake at midnight, or the times you steady your breathing in front of the mirror. You are used to not being understood and no longer expect it. You just keep living, keep playing the sensible role. When these coping mechanisms repeat for years, they no longer remain behaviors, but become how you see yourself. You start believing that only by suppressing needs and staying stable can you earn others' affection and respect. You repeatedly check in your mind if others distance themselves because you are not good enough. And after every cooling relationship, you first reflect on whether you were too emotional. You mistake self-compression for social wisdom, quick concession for high emotional intelligence, and silent non-competition for the symbol of maturity. Over time, you truly begin to believe if I am careful enough, relationships will not break. If I am useful enough, I will not be abandoned. If I demand nothing, I will not be disliked. These are the survival rules you internalized. They were not imposed by others, but built bit by you, after countless disappointments. You once thought this approach would make you safer, but you grew lonelier. You once thought being sensible enough would earn a stable relationship, but you are only remembered when needed. You once thought suppressing all desires would spare you disappointment, but you became someone even you struggle to truly connect with. Your presence grows vague, your emotional responses weaken, and your preferences become ambiguous. You stand in crowds, and others see only your stable shell, unaware that you have not truly felt moved in a long time. You bear so much in life, yet always feel superfluous. You consider others thoroughly, yet find it hard to believe anyone will proactively consider you. You are not without longing for care. Every time you tried to get close, you met withdrawal or indifference. So you learn to shut up, yield, and be alone, with "I'm used to it" on your lips and "I'm fine" as your default answer. Your heart has long grown numb, not because it stopped hurting, but because even the feeling of pain has lost its shape. You grow quieter, better at smiling, and devoid of expectations, but also emptier. This emptiness is not about time, but a sense of "I no longer seem to need myself." You even begin to question who you are because you have lived too long merely to accommodate others. You are tired but cannot stop. You are sleepy but dare not rest. You are sad but no longer cry. You live yet seem only a gentle shadow present, yet never truly touched. Until one day, you slowly realize this overly clear-headed life has been draining you all along. You look in the mirror and see a face that has not truly relaxed in a long time. You begin to discover that you do need intimacy. You were just too afraid of disappointment. You do want to be cared for. You were just too used to caring for others first and neglecting yourself. You are not indifferent. After being dismissed too many times, you learn to freeze your emotions. You thought you chose rationality, but you were using it to protect the part of you that gets hurt too easily. You were never without emotions. You simply never had a safe enough space to express them. You worked hard to become someone who never bothers anyone, yet unknowingly pushed yourself to the margins of relationships. You gradually understand that the parts you suppressed have been waiting to be allowed to exist. You begin to wonder, am I truly unworthy of being seen, or did I give up the possibility too early? You revisit those moments you thought were poor performance, the time you broke down emotionally, the time you said no, the night you could not hold back tears. Now you understand, those were not losing control, but finally speaking for yourself. You slowly learn to distinguish true maturity from the shell of forced growth. You begin to admit you can feel sad, vulnerable, and want to rely on others. You finally dare to tell yourself, I can have emotions, and I can be imperfect. You start gently dismantling the beliefs that once suppressed you, gradually letting go of the shackles of I must be strong. I cannot make mistakes, and I cannot trouble others. You begin practicing being with yourself, not as someone who always solves problems, but as a real person with emotions and needs. You start to believe I can be understood, even if I am not always sensible. I can be liked, even if I am occasionally emotional. I can be cherished, even if I am not always useful. You finally realize that those moments you once saw as weakness were actually you drawing closer to your true self. You were not unflappably calm. You simply had no choice. But now, you can give yourself a new choice. You no longer need to be the first to understand others. Try understanding yourself instead. You no longer always yield. Say this time, I hope someone considers me too. You do not live just to survive. You deserve to live for yourself. Healing is never a dramatic awakening, but a slow, gentle process that requires practice. It begins the first time you realize you no longer need to carry everyone's emotions or take responsibility for every silence. You start allowing yourself to pause midway through busyness, listening to your inner voice instead of rushing to meet external expectations. You begin saying no when you want to, no longer nodding and smiling by default. You start facing grievances honestly, saying, I do not like this, instead of forcing yourself to rationalize others' behavior. You stop becoming useful to earn love and stop vanishing from relationships to avoid conflict. You finally allow yourself a place, not as a fixer, listener, or buffer, but as a whole person. You no longer use rationality to stifle every urge to cry, or sensibility to mask your desire to be understood. You begin practicing softness, not to draw others closer, but to let yourself breathe. You also begin practicing firmness, not to win respect, but to stop ignoring your own voice. You discover that the emotions you once felt compelled to hide can be authentic expressions. You realize that a good enough life is never about getting everything right, but about finally living honestly. You slowly understand that relationships you strain to, maintain through constant compromise and contraction, were not true connections. You no longer need to play anyone. You only need to slowly return to yourself. You give yourself more space and stop being so harsh on yourself. You no longer obsess over performing well, but start asking, do I feel at ease in this relationship? You no longer choose silence to avoid conflict, but practice expressing true feelings in a gentle way. You even begin looking forward to the increasingly whole version of yourself, even if it still feels unfamiliar. One day, you stand in a crowd, no longer the ever-quiet and considerate person, but someone who can breathe freely. You no longer need to strive to earn anything. You begin to believe I, as I am, deserve to be loved. You will gradually understand that healing is not becoming a new person, but slowly remembering who you were before fear took hold.